Hi, my name is Piet Eeckhout. I teach the course on the LLM on EU trade and external relations law. I'm a professor of EU law at University College London, obviously. That's the program you're looking at presently. And I've been working on this subject for quite some time, too long for me to remember actually. The fact that you are looking at this little video means that you're at least curious to know something more about EU trade and external relations law, or else you're a very diligent prospective student who's looking at all the modules on offer, but that'll probably take you some time. Now, why might you be more than curious, and why might you be further interested in taking this module? I know that many of you are from outside the European Union. That's the normal kind of intake of LLM students which we have, but that could still, would still not preclude you from being interested in this module. Think about the EU and the EU's internal market. It's a market for goods and services, as probably the largest in economic terms, the largest market in the world, more than 500 million consumers. I know that many of you aspire to become business lawyers. So even if you're from outside the European Union and you want to do business, or you're working for companies seeking to do business within the European Union, it might be useful to know something about the way in which the European Union organizes and regulates its trade relations. So that's one part of the course. We look at the EU's trade policy. So my module will tell you all you need to know about how the EU in legal terms organizes its external trade relations. It will look at what we call the EU's common commercial policy, and you may know this or you may not know this, but this is actually a very crucial area of EU policy making, and in legal terms it is one where the EU has been given an exclusive competence. Whichever trade negotiation is conducted from a European perspective, it can only be done by the European Union. It cannot be done by individual member states of the European Union. They have given all those powers to the European Union. So we will look at what is a very important achievement of EU policy making and EU law, and quite unique in that sense. It shows how unique the EU is as an international organization, because there are, to my knowledge, no other international organizations which have been given such broad exclusive policy-making powers and law-making powers. What does this mean, for example? It means that the European Union is a member of the World Trade Organization, very important member of the World Trade Organization. So if you're interested in international trade law, the law of the World Trade Organization, it's also very relevant, I think, to know something about how the EU operates within the International Trade Organization. And the member states of the EU are also members of the WTO, but in practice it is really the EU through the European Commission and its representation in Geneva which makes all decisions at the WTO, all European decisions. Another example of how the EU acts in international trade, because the WTO is not at present the politically most active organization, international organization. Another example is the fact that the EU is currently negotiating quite a lot of trade agreements, bilateral trade agreements with a number of countries around the world. The most famous of those negotiations is with the United States, the so-called TTIP, which is being negotiated, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which is very much in the news. Even the Prime Minister of this country, the United Kingdom, likes that side of the EU's work. And it's a huge negotiation which tries to create a transatlantic market. We had, for example, the EU Commissioner for Trade, Mr. Karel de Gucht, who is from Belgium, but is responsible in the EU Commission for Trade Relations. We had him here over at UCL a couple of months ago to give a lecture on these negotiations, which was very interesting and well attended. For anyone who's kind of looking at this and reading about it in the newspapers or hearing about it in the media, you may also have heard that these negotiations are very controversial. One of the most controversial sides to these negotiations is that the European Union should also like to set up a system of investment protection in the agreement with the United States, which would involve investor-state arbitration, so that international investors, American investors in Europe and European investors in the US, could actually go to international arbitration against governments which interfere with their investments. That's not proving very popular, particularly with NGOs, but also other groups and interests. There's a huge debate now about whether this is necessary, but that's another kind of policy of the EU. It's international investment protection policy, which is really developing, which we will be looking at. It can be useful to take this module just to study how the EU operates in international trade. But the module doesn't stop there. It's EU trade and external relations law. What in any event the EU's role in trade already shows is that the EU is becoming an ever more significant international actor, particularly in trade, but also in many other areas. If I can just give one other example, which is related to economic matters, but is not necessarily trade as such. One other area in which the EU is very active and which is really a booming area with many legal issues and questions arising, that would be the EU's policies on international sanctions. That's actually already also an area in which the EU has been involved for a long time, but since 2001, since 9/11, and the international counter-terrorism effort which followed 9/11, the EU has become ever more involved in this field. Essentially what the EU does, for example in the field of counter-terrorism, is to freeze the assets of people or groups who could be responsible for supporting international terrorism. Often this is conjunction with international policies at the level of the United Nations, the Security Council of the United Nations, which are then being implemented by the EU, but the EU also adopts sanctions of its own. It's adopted quite a lot of sanctions in the context of the Arab Spring against, at some point, Egypt, the rulers there, Tunisia, Syria, Libya. And of course, at present, there are some sanctions against Russia, which in coming weeks or months might be further strengthened. Again, this is not something just relevant to an evil individual who may be supporting Al-Qaeda or some evil regime. It's very important for international business to make sure that they comply with these sanctions, and there's a lot of litigation going on in this field, and the EU's policies are perhaps not as aggressive as those of the United States in this field. As I'm talking, there's a lot to do in the media about sanctions, US sanctions against BNP, a big French bank, which is protesting those sanctions, but also the EU has similar sanctions, even though they may not amount to the same kind of sums of money for the banks involved. So that's another policy we will be looking at. And actually what this allows me to say further about the course is to look a little bit at what the course also offers in terms of deeper intellectual questions. If you look at a policy like the sanctions policy of the European Union, it raises all kinds of issues, important legal issues, which are not confined just to sanctions, which are not confined to simply the EU as an actor, an international actor, but which have broader resonance. In the context of the sanctions policies, we've seen important case law developing at the European courts, the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, which is really about how the law of the European Union relates to decisions by the Security Council, so the law of the United Nations under the Charter. And essentially what in some of these cases, those with some interest in EU law may have heard about this litigation. It's called Kadi, after the name of the Saudi Arabian businessman who was involved in the litigation. What's been involved there, what the European Court of Justice has been doing, is essentially to review the way in which the UN Security Council after 9/11 adopted its counter-terrorism policies. because there were huge questions of due process there. Of course, many of the people on these lists and who are targeted by sanctions, assets freezes, have some link with terrorism, but not all of them necessarily have that link, and Mr. Kadi claimed that he didn't, and at the time at the Security Council there really wasn't any proper review process, and the EU Court of Justice simply decided that the EU on its side could not simply implement these sanctions if the persons concerned didn't know the case against them, hadn't had an opportunity to be heard, to bring their arguments against the allegations against them. And so Mr. Kadi won that litigation in the EU courts. And this raises much broader questions about a very significant problem of law in this globalized world, namely you have all these different legal systems, legal orders, you have law of the states, you have laws at the European level, you have laws made at an international level, public international law. How do all these systems interrelate? What is the role of courts within one system when they are asked to apply the norms of a different system? Many scholars look at this from what they call a perspective of legal pluralism. I'm myself not so sure that questions of conflict can always be resolved by simply saying that we have many different legal systems and that actually their relationships are unregulated. So this course will also kind of look at these questions. So this is just some insights into how I see the course. It's not really a week-to-week overview of what we're doing, but you can check that further on the website. And you can always get in touch with me if that's needed as well. Maybe a few words about how the course is taught. Most of the classes, nearly all of the classes, are taught by me. I do try to bring in occasionally an expert on a particular topic. This year that was the EU Commissioner himself on the TTIP negotiations with the United States. But other than that, it's a fairly standard format of teaching, 2-hour seminars. Usually the group for this course is not very large, so you will of course be expected to do quite a bit of reading, manageable reading for this class, I think, in advance of the seminar, where I will introduce the topic we're looking at that particular week, and then try to stimulate a discussion on some of the most significant questions which the specific topic which we're looking at raises. The course is assessed with a 2-hour exam and an essay. It's a 3,000-word essay on some parts of the course, and at the end of the year a 2-hour exam on a different part of the course. So it's a nice mixture, I think, allowing you to take some more time to write an essay and actually also sit an exam. So by all means register for the course. It will not be, I think the advantage will be that it will be a fairly small class, which means you will be more actively involved. And if you don't want to sign up for the course, you can of course always buy my book on EU external relations law. I've promised my children to retire very soon on the strength of the royalties. I'm not really there yet, so and that would be, but it would be a much more tedious way of getting into the subject and actually taking the course. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy your time at UCL.